Chapter: Vibrant Artworks. The golden rays of morning spilled through the ruins as Helena led Miles through the crumbling corridors of Atlantis. They walked in silence for a while, the soft hum of metromite veins beneath their feet blending with the distant trickle of water. As they rounded a corner, Miles stopped in his tracks, his eyes caught by a breathtaking mural stretching across the wall. The artwork was vibrant, almost alive, with intricate geometrical shapes interwoven with serpents that seemed to twist and coil into infinity. The colors shimmered faintly, as if the metromite itself had infused the pigments with life. Miles tilted his head, captivated by its surreal beauty. The patterns and colors reminded him of something recent. "This," he said, his voice trailing off. "This looks like ayahuasca art. Back home, people create these kinds of patterns and images after drinking it. It's visionary, otherworldly." Helena turned to him, her green eyes lighting up with recognition. "That's because it is," she said, gesturing to the mural. "Whenever I drink ayahuasca, I feel inspired. The visions I see, they're unlike anything in the waking world. They pour out of me into drawings, carvings, even paintings. Most of our temples are filled with art like this, made by my ancestors during their own journeys." Miles ran his fingers lightly over the wall, careful not to disturb the ancient art. "It's incredible! Back where I'm from, people describe ayahuasca as a connection to something greater, a way to see beyond ourselves. But this..." He glanced back at her, his tone reverent. "This is something else entirely? Your people turn their visions into legacy." Helena smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I suppose it's part of who we are, to take what's inside and make it tangible." She paused, glancing at him. "Do you like it?" Miles turned fully to face her, his gaze lingering for a moment. "I do," he said, his voice lowering slightly. "But I think I'm more distracted by something else." Helena frowned slightly, tilting her head. "What?" Miles stepped closer, his eyes sweeping over her. She had dressed with care that morning, her flowing tunic catching the soft light, its edges embroidered with faintly glowing patterns. Her long, flowing hair cascaded down her back, and the spiral tattoos above and below her green eyes seemed to shimmer faintly, adding to her ethereal beauty. "You," he said simply, his gaze warm. "You're breathtaking." Helena blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Me?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yes, you," Miles said, a playful smile tugging at his lips. He reached out, gently brushing his fingers along the edge of her hair. Your hair, your tattoos, the way you've dressed, did you do this for me?" Helena's cheeks flushed and she glanced away for a moment, clearly embarrassed. Well, I suppose," she admitted. "I've never had to dress for anyone before. You're the first." Miles smiled, leaning closer. "Well, let me just say you didn't have to try so hard. You'd be stunning no matter what." Helena's blush deepened, and she looked at him with a shy smile. Before she could respond, Miles closed the small space between them, tilting her chin up with his fingers and pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her lips. Her body tensed for a brief moment before she relaxed into him, her hand lightly resting on his chest. When they pulled back, Miles brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice low. "I should probably stop staring at you, or I'll never focus on this tour." Helena laughed softly, still blushing, but the warmth in her gaze was unmistakable. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," she said, her voice teasing. Miles chuckled, taking her hand as they continued their walk, both feeling the unspoken connection between them grow stronger with every step. As they walked, Helena led Miles through pathways veiled by overgrown vines and crystalline formations, their feet echoing softly on the smooth, ancient stone. The air seemed thicker here, charged with the faint hum of metromite veins that pulsed like a living heartbeat throughout the city. The ruins were both haunting and breathtaking, a blend of natural beauty and advanced engineering. They arrived at what must have once been a bustling marketplace. Tall, columned structures framed the space, their surfaces etched with intricate carvings of Atlantean life. Merchants trading glowing goods, families gathered at communal tables, and ships with elegant, sleek designs gliding across canals. "This was the Agora," Helena said, her voice reverent. A place where people gathered. They traded not just goods, but ideas. My parents used to tell me stories about how it was alive with music and conversation. Miles walked beside her, marveling at the glowing statues that lined the marketplace. Each statue represented an Atlantean deity or historical figure, their features detailed and lifelike, their eyes set with glowing crystal orbs. One statue in particular caught his eye, a towering figure with a trident surrounded by carvings of crashing waves. "Who's this?" Miles asked, gesturing to the statue. "Poseidon," Helena replied, "the protector of Atlantis. At least, that's what we believed. My mother said he was a symbol of our unity with the ocean, a reminder that we were meant to live in harmony with the water, not conquer it." Miles ran his fingers along the base of the statue, the smooth stone warm beneath his touch. He tilted his head, studying the imposing figure before him. "So, was Poseidon the god who came from the sky and created Atlantis?" Helena frowned slightly, shaking her head. "No such thing. We don't worship gods, Miles." He paused, turning the thought over in his mind. If Helena's people didn't worship gods, then Plato's version of Atlantis was even more flawed than he had already suspected. The idea of divine rulers, of a civilization blessed or cursed by the gods, had always felt like a myth layered over truth. But hearing it from someone who had lived here made it undeniable. Poseidon wasn't a deity to them. He was an idea, a symbol of the ocean's vast power, something they connected with rather than revered. So why had Plato twisted the story? Was it deliberate, a way to fit Atlantis into his philosophical teachings? Or had time simply warped the truth, reshaping a civilization into a legend that suited the storytellers of the future? Either way, one thing was certain. What he had learned about Atlantis so far was nothing like the myth the world had come to believe. Miles exhaled, shaking his head with a smirk. "Guess that ruins a few history books." They continued walking, arriving at a large courtyard surrounded by arched walkways. The floor of the courtyard was covered in colorful tiles that shimmered faintly as they moved. At the center stood a massive circular pool filled with crystal clear water, its surface undisturbed despite the faint glow emanating from its depths. "This was a gathering place," Helena explained. "The tiles absorb light from the metromite and change colors based on the time of day. People used to meet here for festivals and celebrations. My parents said it was one of the most beautiful places in the city." Miles stepped closer to the pool, mesmerized by the way the light danced across its surface. "It still is. Even in ruins, it's breathtaking." Helena watched him, her expression soft. "There's more." She led him to a narrow passage that opened into a network of preserved canals. The water shimmered with streaks of glowing energy, casting reflections onto the smooth walls. Along the edges of the canals were small platforms with sleek pod-like boats resting on them. Helena approached one, brushing her fingers along its surface. The veins of metromite embedded in the boat lit up, and the pod hummed softly as if awakening from a long sleep. She led him to a passage that opened into a network of preserved canals. The water shimmered with streaks of glowing energy, casting reflections onto the smooth walls. Along the edges of the canals were small platforms with sleek, like boats resting on them. Helena approached one, brushing her fingers along its surface. The veins of metromite embedded in the boat lit up and hummed softly as if awakening from a long sleep. "This is a transport," Helena said. "Atlanteans used them to travel the canals. The metromite veins in the water powered them." She climbed into the, motioning for Miles to join her. He hesitated, glancing at the water. "Are you sure this thing still works?" Helena smirked. "Trust me." As soon as he stepped in, Helena tapped a glowing panel inside the hum intensified and the lifted slightly, floating just above the surface of the water. With a gentle nudge, the glided forward, moving smoothly along the canal. Miles leaned back, marveling at the experience. "This is unreal." Helena smiled, her eyes on the water ahead. "It's how we lived. Everything was connected. Our homes, our marketplaces, even our agriculture. The canals weren't just for travel. They were part of our irrigation system. The metromite kept the water clean and nourished the crops." Miles looked around as the passed-by murals painted along the canal walls. The murals depicted scenes of Atlantis at its height. Fields of glowing crops, children playing by the water, and ships traversing vast oceans. "Your people weren't just advanced," he said softly. "They were harmonious, balanced." Helena nodded. "That's what my parents always said. Progress meant nothing if it came at the cost of harmony." They moved deeper into the ruins, and as they rounded a bend, a colossal rusted structure emerged from the depths of the submerged city. A massive, partially collapsed airship, its sleek form still recognizable despite centuries underwater. Miles's breath caught as they drifted closer. The wreckage was half submerged, its once smooth hull fractured, revealing the intricate metromite veins that had once coursed through it. "What is that?" Miles asked, eyes wide. Helena let out a slow breath, her expression unreadable. "That," she said, "is what remains of our flying submarines." Miles blinked. "Flying submarines?" She nodded, guiding the alongside the wreckage. "We called them Orales. They were our greatest innovation. These ships could travel through the ocean as easily as they could glide through the sky. The metromite in their hulls generated energy fields that reduced gravitational pull and friction, allowing seamless movement between air and water." Miles reached out, running his fingers over a fractured piece of metal as the floated past. "You're telling me your people had gravity-defying ships and yet Atlantis still fell?" Helena's gaze lingered on the wreckage, sadness flickering in her eyes. "Power doesn't make a civilization invincible, Miles. The Earth is always stronger." They moved past the wreck, but Miles kept staring, trying to imagine what it must have looked like in its prime, soaring over the ocean, descending into the depths with impossible grace. He exhaled. "Theo would lose his mind if he saw this." Helena smirked faintly. "I'd love to see him try to explain it." They continued toward a towering building with an arched entrance, its facade covered in carvings of waves and stars. Inside, the air was cooler and the walls were lined with rows of glowing panels, each displaying holographic images and glyphs. But Miles's thoughts lingered on the fallen ship behind them, a silent monument to the impossible achievements of Atlantis and the fragility of even the greatest civilizations. The pod stopped near a towering building with an arched entrance, its facade covered in carvings of waves and stars. Inside, the air was cooler, and the walls were lined with rows of glowing panels, each displaying holographic images and glyphs. "This was the Hall of Knowledge," Helena said. "Atlanteans came here to learn, to study, to innovate. My parents spent a lot of time here. It's where they taught me about our history." Miles ran his fingers over one of the panels, watching as the holographic display shifted to show an image of Atlantis as it once was, a city alive with light and energy, its people thriving in harmony. He turned to Helena, his voice filled with awe. "You're not just the last Atlantean, Helena. You're a living link to all of this." Helena's expression softened, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. "I've always thought of myself as a survivor," she admitted. "But maybe I am more than that." Miles smiled, stepping closer. "You are, and I think your parents would be proud of how much you've kept alive." Helena met his gaze, her green eyes shimmering with gratitude. For a moment, the ruins around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing amidst the breathtaking remnants of a civilization that had once touched the stars. As they continued their walk, the pathways narrowed, and the ruins around them grew denser, shrouded in vines and glowing moss that clung to the ancient walls. The hum of metromite veins seemed to grow louder, reverberating through the stone as if guiding them towards something important. Helena stopped in front of a towering stone structure, half hidden by overgrowth. Its arched entrance was framed by intricate carvings of Atlantean glyphs, spirals, and celestial patterns that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. Miles stared at it, his heart pounding slightly. The structure felt different, alive, as if it had been waiting for them. "This is one of Atlantis's hidden temples," Helena said, her voice reverent. "It's been sealed for decades, maybe longer. My parents showed me how to open it." Miles glanced at her, intrigued. "It's still functional?" Helena nodded and stepped forward, running her fingers lightly over the glyphs etched into the archway. The symbols began to glow faintly under her touch, their light growing brighter as she traced a specific sequence. "The metromite veins run through the temple's foundation," she explained. "They power the door and its mechanisms. It's protected by a combination of glyphs and gestures, like a key that only Atlanteans know." She finished the sequence, then stepped back, raising her hands. With a fluid motion, she moved her fingers in a series of precise gestures, and the glyphs responded instantly, pulsing with light. The air around them seemed to shift, and with a low, resonant hum, the massive stone door began to slide open, revealing a hidden chamber within. Miles stared, his jaw slack. "That's incredible. It's like the temple recognized you." Helena glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It did. It's encoded to respond to Atlantean DNA and the movements tied to our traditions. No one else could open it." She stepped inside, gesturing for Miles to follow. "Come, there's more." The chamber inside was breathtaking. The walls glowed softly with metromite veins that illuminated the space in hues of gold and blue. Ceremonial tools and artifacts were arranged on stone pedestals, each one intricately crafted with glowing inlays and detailed carvings. Crystals of various shapes and sizes rested in alcoves, their cores pulsing with faint energy as if alive. The air was thick with a sense of history, every corner of the room speaking of Atlantis' forgotten greatness. Helena walked to a central pedestal where a large circular artifact rested. Its surface was engraved with more glyphs, spirals, and geometric patterns, and it seemed to emit a faint rhythmic hum. She placed her hand on it, her expression softening. "This is the Pillar of Harmony," she said quietly. "It represents one of the core values of Atlantis, balance between progress and nature. It was always here to remind us of what we stood for." Miles approached, running his fingers over the carvings. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "Your people weren't just advanced. They had a philosophy, a purpose behind everything they built." Helena nodded, moving to another pedestal that held a ceremonial staff. Its shaft was crafted from a translucent material, with metromite veins spiraling up its length. At the top, a crystal glowed faintly, casting shifting patterns of light across the chamber. "This staff belonged to the temple's keeper," she explained. "It was used in ceremonies to celebrate wisdom and resilience. My mother told me it was a symbol of guidance." Miles picked up a small artifact from a nearby table, a palm-sized orb filled with swirling, glowing energy. As he turned it in his hands, the energy shifted, creating patterns and glyphs that seemed to tell a story. "What's this?" he asked, fascinated. "That's an archive sphere," Helena said, stepping closer. "Atlanteans use them to store knowledge, histories, lessons, philosophies. They're interactive. Hold it steady and focus your thoughts." Miles did as she instructed, and the orb's glow intensified. Suddenly, a holographic image projected from the sphere, showing a vision of Atlantis in its prime. Towering structures stretched into the sky, shimmering with metromite energy, while sleek ships glided through the canals below. People moved through vibrant marketplaces and grand halls, their faces calm and content. Miles exhaled slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's alive. Your people, your city. It wasn't just a place, it was a dream." Helena's gaze softened as she watched the projection. "It was," she said quietly, "and we lost it because we forgot how fragile balance can be." She led him further into the chamber, pointing out other relics, carvings that depicted stories of Atlantean mythology, tools used for agriculture and healing, and even a small model of an ancient ship, its design sleek and aerodynamic. Each artifact told a story, and Helena shared them all, her voice filled with both pride and sorrow. Miles listened intently, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a tour, it was a window into a world that had been lost to time, a glimpse of what humanity could achieve when it worked in harmony with itself and nature. And as Helena spoke, he realized she wasn't just a survivor. She was a living link to this incredible civilization, a keeper of its legacy. He turned to her, his voice filled with admiration. "You've kept all of this alive, Helena. The stories, the history, the meaning behind it all. You're not just preserving Atlantis, you are Atlantis." Helena blinked, her expression softening as a faint blush rose to her cheeks. I'm just doing what I can, she said quietly. For my parents. For my people. Miles smiled, stepping closer. You're doing more than that. You're giving it a future. For a moment, they stood there in the glow of the chamber, the artifacts around them whispering of a past that felt alive once more. Helena's gaze met his, and for the first time, she felt that Atlantis wasn't just a memory. It was something worth fighting for, something that could still inspire hope. As they wandered deeper into the ruins, their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet corridors, Helena paused to point out more of Atlantis's intricate designs. The metromite veins pulsed faintly along the walls, casting a warm, ambient glow that illuminated murals and carvings of long-lost Atlantean life. "You've been so quiet," Helena said, glancing at Miles with a faint smile. "Are you overwhelmed by how primitive we are?" Miles laughed, shaking his head as he stopped to study a glowing console embedded in the wall. "Primitive? Helena, compared to your technology, I feel like I crawled out of a cave. When people from my time imagine the future, we picture gizmos, robots, things that make people go, wow, look at what we've achieved. But now I'm here in Atlantis, and we're the primitives." Helena raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "You mean to tell me your future civilization doesn't have anything like this?" She tapped the console and it sprang to life, projecting a holographic map of the city with glowing pathways marking the energy flows. Miles shook his head in mock defeat. "Not even close. I mean, we've got touchscreens and drones, but holographic maps that talk to glowing veins in the walls? Yeah, no, this is beyond us." Helena grinned. "So you're just an outsider, lost in wonder?" "Completely," Miles admitted with a laugh. "I guess I'm not as impressive as I thought." She chuckled softly, her tone teasing but warm. "Don't worry, I'll try not to look down on your primitive ways." Miles playfully clutched his chest. "Ouch, Helena! That hurts!" They both laughed, the sound echoing through the ancient hallways. It was a rare moment of levity amidst the weight of their surroundings, and it made Miles feel closer to her. The easy way she teased him, the way she carried herself with quiet strength. It was unlike anyone he'd ever met. As they rounded another corner, they came across a series of statues carved from smooth stone, their surfaces glowing faintly with embedded crystals. Helena stopped, her expression softening as she gazed up at one of the statues. "This one. This was my mother's favorite," she said quietly. "It symbolizes resilience." Miles stood beside her, watching her face as she spoke. "You've done so much to keep this place alive, Helena. Your people would be proud of you. Your parents would be proud of you." Helena glanced at him, her green eyes shimmering with emotion. "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if it's enough. Keeping the stories alive, preserving what's left. It doesn't change what happened." "No," Miles said gently, "but it gives it meaning. You've made sure Atlantis isn't just a memory. You've made it matter." Helena looked at him, her lips parting as if to say something, but instead she hesitated. The space between them felt charged, something unspoken hanging in the air. Then, slowly, she leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, uncertain, but full of emotion, a quiet moment of trust breaking through the walls she had built around herself. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed, and she gazed at him with something between curiosity and vulnerability. "What is this feeling?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Miles searched her face, seeing the weight of loneliness and wonder reflected in her emerald eyes. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing against her cheek, grounding her in the moment. Then, with quiet certainty, he leaned in and kissed her again, lingering just a little longer this time. When he pulled back, he smiled softly. "Love," he said simply. "This is love." Helena blinked, her breath catching, as if the word itself held something fragile and unknown. "Love," she echoed, testing the sound of it as though speaking a word from another world. Miles tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his voice warm and steady. "It's what happens when you find someone who makes everything else fade away. Someone who makes you feel like you found the one thing you didn't even know you were missing." She stared at him for a long moment, processing the weight of his words. Then, ever so slowly, a smile broke through, the kind of smile that carried both fear and hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it was real. "Love," she whispered again, this time with something new in her voice, not just wonder, but acceptance. And as she leaned into him, resting her forehead against his, the walls she had held up for so long began to crumble piece by piece.